Recovery Ecosystem Podcast is an initiative of Detroit Recovery Project, Incorporated. Our mission is to support sustained recovery, health, and wellness.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Recovery Ecosystem Podcast Show. This segment will focus on parenting, which really builds off of healthy family connections. So, again, I've drawn from my personal experiences of working in the field of substance use disorder and individuals with what's known as co-occurring issues. That's when there's a combination between both mental health and substance use disorders. And in some cases, there's something known as comorbidity. And comorbidity is generally when a person has a mental illness, a substance use disorder, and or some type of physical health challenge. And so when people have those type of challenges, all combined, I would just say it's like scrambled eggs. You got a series of issues. And so for me, it's how do we begin to have healthy discussions that can help us to change our trajectory, but also improve our quality of life as we navigate and live. What I've learned working with people in recovery, and again, you already have those family backgrounds, and sometimes when you have certain family beliefs, you begin to emulate those beliefs, and the things that may seem normal, or shall I say normalized, can be dysfunctional. And so as a new parent, you may want to decide that you don't want to raise your child or you don't want your child to experience perhaps some of the trauma that you may experience, or you want to raise a healthy child, and you want to be able to do that by having some type of roadmap, because we all know some of us first-time parents didn't have a roadmap, we didn't have a role model, and we need some type of guidance and some type of belief that we can be a loving parent. To see, we have stuff that's innate. Again, the recovery ecosystem, it's all about things that help us to grow. And when we assess things that help us to grow, we got to look at our internal and external systems. How we feel. Do you have confidence that you can be a good mother or father? Do you think you have the unconditional love that's required to be a father or a mother? Can you love your child unconditionally? Can you guide your child? Will you sacrifice for your child? These are natural, innate things that parents do for their children. And sometimes, especially if you have a history of alcoholism or some form of addiction, it takes all your energy. It robs you of being a productive parent. And so we got to understand, when you stop chasing and now you have this new opportunity perhaps to rebound with your kid, because I've seen some kids say flat out, I don't want to have sugar, honey, iced tea to do with you. And I've heard, friends that have been drug and alcohol free for 10, 15 years. Because some of their children witnessed what their father had done to their mother, and in some cases witnessed what their mother had done to their father because of the act of addiction. And remember, in the last chapter, I used the word resentment. Some say resentment is the number one offender. Resentment is the number one offender. And that's why we have to let it go, because it plays this tape over and over and over. Can you imagine playing a tape over and over and over and how it begins to affect you internally? And that's why, it's important to really assess, as you strive to be a parent, you want to be. And I think I know when I was raised, my mother encouraged me to do better in life than she did. And I think that's a natural part in some homes, in some households. My mother was a registered nurse by trade, and she was the first person to graduate from college in her generation. And so she really, really stressed education in our home. And somehow I began to internalize that, which is probably indicative of why I stayed on the path of pursuing higher education to obtain my doctorate degree. It was for some satisfaction, but it was also, I knew I had some responsibility to continue the legacy of the Johnson family. And I think we all have that responsibility to continue the legacy. And we all have the responsibility to look at our past and continue to build our resiliency based on our past. Because we all have trouble. We've overcome some troubled waters. Whether we were parents or without parents, it all comes with a cost. And so I want to make sure we give ourselves credit for enduring, and keep enduring and keep believing and keep working hard no matter what life throws at you. Because life throws curveballs. And I've seen some men, oh man, I got this girl pregnant. Oh, I just discovered I got 2 girls pregnant and 2 women pregnant at the same time. All right, you in trouble, buddy. Or I've heard women say, I don't know which man got me pregnant. Okay, you're in trouble, sister. But regardless of the case, the child didn't ask to be brought into this world. Who and what? We want to make sure we are providing love, nurturing, and care for our children. And if you don't have the skills, the internal and the external awareness to provide those skills, I will leave you with, again, some spiritual principles that you can begin to internalize and embrace to help you on your journey as a parent. But before I go deeper into that, I want to read one of the vignettes. In each chapter of the recovery ecosystem, I develop vignettes that tell small stories. And then I also have a section where there are spiritual principles that can help individuals, give you some tools to really think about. But let me just read one of the vignettes, which you'll find very, very interesting. And again, these names are fictional, but these scenarios are real, really, really, really real. This is a random name. Hosea is a 35-year-old man with 6 months of living clean. His wife died while he was in active addiction right before he decided to stop using. He was left to care for his 3 children as a single father. Jose works and is staying clean mainly to be a father to his children. He has no guidance as most of his family members use drugs or alcohol, so he knows he cannot be around them. Jose's children are having problems adjusting to their mother's death. Hosea did not have good parenting techniques modeled for him by his parents. They were focused on providing the basic necessities for their children. Hosea was taught that a parent's primary responsibility is to provide food and shelter. That's a couple things. That's a responsibility. Jose does not know how to support his children through their grieving process, and he is also grieving. Hosea is sad and he feels overwhelmed. His oldest child is able to act as a babysitter after school until Jose arrives home. But Jose still has to shop for groceries, cook, keep the house together, and wash clothes. His oldest child helps him a bit, but it's still overwhelming. Hosea does not participate in any recovery support programs since he doesn't think he has the time available to do so. He does not have any mentors or real friends and has disconnected from his buddies that he used to get high with. Jose has no real support. He feels exhausted, panicky, unsure, guilty, lonely, confused, discontented, apprehensive, inadequate, frustrated, and torn every day. To be an effective parent, there are a variety of spiritual principles that must be applied. And so now I'll take a minute to talk about some of the spiritual principles. The three main spiritual principles: patience, unconditional love, and selfless service. Patience is defined as the capacity, habit, or fact of being patient. And patient is also defined as bearing pains or trials calmly with or without complaint. Now, that's a tough one. Unconditional love, a common understanding of its meaning, which is, I will love you no matter what. Can you really truly say that you love somebody no matter what? Powerful, powerful. But it's actions involved in these words. It requires action. And you want to be committed to being able to embrace unconditional love for yourself and others. And again, I always want to include, you want to give yourself patience, and you also want to provide patience to others as well. Because ultimately, we all want to get to a place in life where we're non-judgmental. And that takes work. It takes exercise to really, truly to have this spirit of non-judgment. And then lastly, selfless service. Selfless is defined as having no concern for self, and service is defined as contribution to the welfare of others. Therefore, selfless service is defined as the performance of duties having concern for oneself and the welfare of others. And sometimes we see that in certain occupations. Like I think some occupations like nurses, like school teachers, like law enforcers or enforcement agencies, these are people who in some cases have developed the spirit of being of service to others. But I will also charge you and say there is something called self-preservation is the law of nature. And so it's important that everything starts with you. And so if you need parenting skills, if you know your health has been compromised, if you know you have this sibling who's non-supportive, or you have this sibling who's been trying to support you, you have to know what your ecosystem is. And how do you tweak your ecosystem to ensure that you are on the right path? And so I want to say to anybody who are on the verge of becoming a parent for the first time, or whether you're a parent right now and you're finding and having some struggles as a parent, I want to encourage you to employ the three spiritual principles that I talked about in this chapter. And that means patience with self and others. That means unconditional love that's indicative of your actions towards self and others. your children. And then lastly, selfless service. Make sure you give to your children, give to yourself. And I just want to say thank you all for tuning in to the Recovery Ecosystem Podcast, the parenting chapter. It will help you be the best you. Thank you very much. Welcome back to the Recovery Ecosystem Podcast. This next chapter I'll be focusing on will be supportive housing. Again, this is the Recovery Ecosystem Podcast. This segment will focus on supportive housing. You know, people who are in early sobriety or early recovery, after, using drugs and alcohol for a long time, in most cases, once they begin their recovery journey, their sobriety journey, they need time to really work on self. And in order to really work on self, you need to be able to live in a supportive environment. Or with this segment, we talk about supportive housing. That means being in a place or a home or a facility that's going to help support your recovery and your sobriety. And a big part, and we'll just say recovery, sobriety are interchangeable. But in order to really stay on that path, because early recovery requires individuals to build what we call a foundation. And once you have that foundation, you're no longer as high risk or shaky as you may have been in the very beginning. And so just imagine a person been using and drinking for 5, 10, 20 years in a row, and all of a sudden they've made this decision to no longer use any chemicals. Now, what happens with the chemicals? Well, first, we need to understand that chemical dependency, drug and alcohol use, has become a coping strategy in our community. People, it starts off as a way to cope with their reality, and in some cases, part of that coping strategy is to escape their reality. So that means you need something to make you feel good. You need something to make you feel happy instead of you feeling internal happiness. You follow me? So be mindful that now all of a sudden you've put the substances down and you've been, let's just say, drug and alcohol free for 30 days, but 90% of your associates, that's 99% of your associates, all use drugs and alcohol. So in that case, if you're pursuing sobriety, you're going to have to walk away from your quote unquote friends because they can put you at a greater risk. And in some cases, in order to do that, you have to leave your community. Some cases, you have to leave your home. You may even have to leave your family. Because again, some family members can be toxic. You wake up, there's a saying now, wake and bake. You walk up, you wake up, and you smell weed being smoked. Or whatever the case is. I was at a park yesterday and somebody said, "You want a sip of this mimosa?" It was 10 o'clock in the morning, homeboy, but I don't drink. I said, "No, thank you, sir. Enjoy your mimosa." And you can see you can always see when people excited about the drinking and the drugging because it has developed into a habit. And so when I talk about supportive housing, I just want people to be mindful that people need to be in an environment that's supporting their sobriety. Sobriety is a new lifestyle. And in order to really embrace the lifestyle, again, requires building that foundation. So anytime you do something, let's just say for 90 days in a row, it has now, you've developed new habits. People need to be in an environment where they could develop new habits that's going to ultimately support their recovery process. And in some cases, people, early recovery, they need employment, they need stable housing, most cases, and depending on the community. Most people I meet in the Metro Detroit community need both. They need somewhere to work and they need somewhere to sleep. And again, I always go back to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy. He talks about some of the fundamental things in the pyramid, and at the base of the pyramid is food and shelter. Well, y'all mean food and shelter. And I'm not just talking about some leftover foods. I'm just not talking about just a roof over your head. I'm talking about a stable home or a stable room where you can sleep and get a good night rest. Not be in an environment where, you know, I've seen some people develop these quote unquote recovery homes, and they have 8 beds in a 2 bedroom home. I've seen people have bunk beds inside the kitchen, and then they're trying to figure out why they have high rates of fighting or high rates of using. And you have 1 bedroom with 8 people living in a house. That sounds like a recipe for a disaster. That sounds like a crisis. And so for us, we're all about providing stable, supportive um, homes. Our homes, we have 3 bedroom homes with no more than 2 to 3 people in the house at one time. Living room, uh, kitchen, dining area, uh, flat screen TVs on the wall, computers and Wi-Fi, and state-of-the-art systems to give people an opportunity to, if they need to work on the resume, if they need to develop emails, if they need some type of um, in some cases, if you're pursuing employment, you need a new address, and if you're pursuing employment, you need an email address. And even though this is 2025, a lot of people still don't have email addresses. A lot of people still don't know how to use a computer and don't know how to navigate the World Wide Web. There is something called a digital divide that continues to permeate in marginalized communities in our country. And so it's important that as we develop supportive housing, that we develop programs that also address the gaps. And when I say address the gaps, I'm talking about being mindful of the employment connections, the digital divide connections, as well as the physical health connection. Being able to perhaps have a connection with a local primary care physician or nurse practitioner, because now these men and women are going into your supportive housing. We want to ensure that they are at least getting their physical health, um, annual physical health assessments, and also dental assessments, optical assessments. I've met people in my path that struggled with reading, only to find out later the struggle was they didn't have they hadn't had an eye exam, and they needed glasses in order to read. Or in some cases, I've met people who were, for lack of better words, illiterate. And so it's important that in supportive housing, we connect people with people who can help teach people how to read and write and prepare for a GED, because people do recover. And sometimes people who are in their early recovery process, they're picking up where they left off at, meaning that they're now moving forward to really ascertain the things they missed out because of their drug addiction. So, what do I mean? What do I mean is some people started using at an early age and never completed high school. Ask me how I know, because I was one of those persons. I was one of those persons that entered into a supportive housing program so that I can stay on the right path. because there were some areas in Detroit I did not want to expose myself to because I know what would have happened. And I also know what it was like to be expelled from all public schools and work towards obtaining a GED and having the right support to help me to obtain my GED. And so for me, it's really, again, supportive housing, and not only those external variables, but some of the internal variables. Because remember, the recovery ecosystem is about your internal and external variables. And so I was fortunate to have men in my life that lived in the supportive housing that knew how to show unconditional love. Because there were many days I didn't have a dime to my name, but another brother will say, here's $20 and give it to me unconditionally. Not saying you owe me $20, to have people in your life that know you're having some financial struggles and to give you what you need during those moments is important. And so again, developing a brotherhood in the supportive housing or developing a sisterhood in the supportive housing, ensuring that there are active 12-step meetings that's in the sober home, but also ensuring that there are other support groups to help people in the supportive home. In fact, I have people who are actively using the Recovery Ecosystem book as a roadmap to teach and help individuals who are in their supportive housing. But supportive housing is one of the top areas of need for people in early and in some cases long-term recovery and sobriety. And so it's important that we're mindful of the needs of people who are on this recovery journey and this sobriety process. And housing, again, that provides that safe space, that safe haven, that provides the unconditional love is what's going to help people to ultimately grow. You want people to be, the supportive housing is a cornerstone of an ecosystem because it's a place that produces and promotes long-term recovery and sobriety. People cannot do it without having supportive housing. So please, if you're an investor, in others, if you have real estate, partner with your local treatment center, partner with the local person who has long-term recovery and sobriety, and help build some supportive housing for the community. I guarantee you it will pay for itself in the long run. There's a big need. And if I had to take a guess, just from a statistical standpoint, I would probably say 4 out of 5 people in early recovery need supportive housing. It is a demand. There is something called supply and demand. But before I wrap up this section, I want to take a moment to read one of the vignettes. Vignettes are always good to really just understand some experience of others in case you yourself could be experiencing something perhaps similar, or even your loved one that's now in early recovery. So the name here, fictitious name, Charles is a 40-year-old man with 2 years clean. He got clean in prison. When he was released, he moved into a transitional housing program that offered supportive housing, supportive services. Charles started looking for work immediately. His case manager gave him a list of felon-friendly employers. It took Charles a while to get hired. He felt rejected every time he didn't get hired. Rejection is a very hurtful feeling to you also. Let's lean into that and respect people and know that when people are experiencing rejection, that we counter that with some type of unconditional love. But he was able to come back to the transition house, and talked to his case manager and the other residents who lived in the home, who encouraged him not to give up, and eventually Charles got a job. The transitional house offered recovery meetings twice a week. Charles attended those meetings and also began attending meetings at other locations. He had obtained his GED in prison but wanted to learn the trade so he can eventually make enough money to get a house and get married. Charles told this to his case manager who connected him with a vocational training program that offered welding classes. Charles completed the program and became a welder. He got a job making enough money to save for his own apartment. He had a long way to go to realize his dream of home ownership, but he was on his way. He felt proud, capable, inspired, optimistic, strong, determined, and hopeful. So again, when we talk about supportive housing, we want to be able to ensure that we foster these environments that help people to be inspired, that help people to be optimistic, that helps people to be determined and hopeful. Hopeful is a valuable um, uh, variable as well. Yeah, so, I talked earlier about supportive housing and some of the important qualities that we want to ensure in our housing that ultimately helps people to gain hope, you know. And one of the beauties I personally found is, if you have, let's just say 14 days sober and you have somebody in the house that is now 9 months sober, the 14-day person is inspired by the person with 9 months, and that person with 9 months of sobriety can inspire the person with 14 days that he or she can obtain nine months. And then there's somebody else coming that may only have 7 days. So the whole process of sobriety is we all support each other, regardless of how much time that we have. We want to make sure that we're constantly promoting hope. And hope is one of the spiritual principles that's been identified in the supportive housing chapter, is creating that space that promotes and fosters hope. And when people have hope, they now have something to live for and to work towards. And it's important that, and when people begin to develop that hope, then they begin to develop a life that's now become somewhat purposeful. Because could you imagine just living through life without a purpose? And when you live life without a purpose, you're more susceptible and you're more prone to fall and crash. But when you live life with purpose, you begin to take life a lot more serious. And that is usually indicative of how you are living as a human person, as a human being. And remember, we're all human beings. We all need connections. We need social interactions. We need social connections. We need love. We need somebody to give us some hope. Because without hope, it's the total opposite. And then the other, what I call spiritual principle that's important, is determination. Some of us have come from this background, especially when you have had poor role models. People say they're going to do something but never do it. Or perhaps you have people in your life that are big time procrastinators. More than likely, we begin to emulate and develop what we've been exposed to in life. And so that's why determination is a key factor in helping people or ensuring that we have um, determination as a key factor in a supportive housing environment. Because again, we're working with people who have given up. Sometimes when you use drugs and alcohol, it beats you down so bad where you just give up. And when you give up, you don't have an ounce of determination. But when you have that determination, it has a way of really keeping you on that path. and keeping you on that sobriety path. Because that sobriety path, that sobriety life, sobriety adventure, it's a ongoing process. You never graduate from sobriety school. It's an ongoing process. And when you have ongoing processes, you want to be determined in pursuit of remaining sober, remaining in recovery. And then the last one is harmony. You want to have a harmonious environment in the supportive housing, which means, again, I talked about brotherly love. I talked about sisterly love. I talked structure. Structure is an important part of adding harmony. And sometimes people go through life without structure, no routine. And that's one of the valuable things I personally learned when I lived in a recovery house is having that structure also helps to create some accountability. And when you have accountability, you begin to do better. So supportive housing connections are extremely important, and having those support systems that I've already talked about and supportive housing segment are of high value. Again, this is Andre Johnson highlighting, or I've highlighted the segment of this show, supportive housing. If you have any further questions, feel free to email me directly or go to our website, recovery4detroit.com, recovery4detroit.com, the recovery ecosystem. Thank you very much.
The Recovery Ecosystem Podcast is produced by Detroit Recovery Project, Incorporated. If you or someone you know needs support for substance use or mental health, call 313-365-3100 or visit recovery4detroit.com. You are not alone.